Hello, everyone. Welcome to our talk. We're just going to wait for a few minutes for others to join. In the meantime, maybe you can let us know where you're from and text in the chat box to let us know where everybody's from and what institution you're from, whether you're a student or not. Okay, I think we can start now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Learning from Ethiopia talk series. Thank you all for joining us. This will be the last talk of the series, and thank you all for joining throughout our programs with all the other attendees. I'd also like to thank Rumi for joining us. I know it's really late for you, but we really appreciate you taking your time and being open to sharing your research with us. We also have here Binyam, our INTBAU Ethiopia chapter chair, who will be talking shortly and introducing Rumi to you guys. We also have Juliet, who is the program and communications coordinator at INTBAU, who will be helping and directing questions from you guys, and also who is helping assisting organizing this talk. Thank you all very much. Now I will pass it on to Binyam to tell you a little bit about INTBAU Ethiopia and introduce you to Rumi. So, Binyam.
Thank you, Mina. Welcome, everyone, from wherever you are. As Mina was saying, this would be the last talk of our series. And on that note, I would like to thank Rumi again for taking time and sharing her research with us, and of course, as Mina was mentioning, staying even past midnight to talk with us, to make this talk accessible for many of us. Just before we go to the talk, I would like to mention that INTBAU Ethiopia is a chapter which is trying to work on local building practices and architecture, and to learn about more of what we do. You can, Amina, I think, should be shortly sharing the link in the chat box, which you can subscribe and become a member of, and then you can also look at our social medias and follow to get constant updates. Having said that, I'll just mention a brief thing about our today's speaker. Rumi, she's an associate professor at correct me if I'm saying this wrong, Shibaura Institute of Technology in Tokyo. She was a visiting researcher at CNRS and worked several years at the Shigeru Ban Architects, and her interest is that she investigates architectural and urban history in Ethiopia, among many others, like in Ghana and in the Philippines, as well as Japan. Drawing on more than 50 years of research in Ethiopian cities, today she will be focusing and speaking mainly on Tigray. Over to you, Rumi.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the INTBAU team for organizing, Mina, Binyam, and Juliet. I appreciate that you have organized this so neatly, and I'm so happy to be here and to share my experiences. My name is Rumi Okazaki, and I have been researching about historical cities in Ethiopia for some time. And so I'd like to share my slide. Can you see this? Okay. So, although my talk today will be focusing on the city of Mekele, I would like to give like an overview of what is really happening in historical cities of Ethiopia. So just to give you a small introduction, the first time I visited Ethiopia was in the early 2000s when I was in the first year of university, and Ethiopia was the first country that I have visited on the African continent. And I was just so amazed by so many things. The architecture, people. Also, Japan is an island, but Ethiopia is a landlocked country, so there is a lot of difference. The population is smaller than Japan, but the area is so much bigger. There's so much diversity, and so I was just very in love with Ethiopia from the first visit, and ever since I have been going back once or twice a year. So one of the first places that I went was the rock-hewn churches in Tigray. And also because my professor worked in Tigray for some time, Professor Richi Miyake, who has been working with Mekele University and Addis Ababa University, and has been researching a lot about historical heritage. So I joined his team and started helping out as a young student. And it's just when when you are living in the very eastern end of Asia, you receive very few information about Africa or Ethiopia. So I really didn't have so much image about the country, but when I visited, there are so many beautiful buildings, and especially in Tigray, there are these beautifully cut stone buildings. So in Japan, we rather build more wooden buildings, not so much of stone. So this kind of building technique was also very fascinating for me. Like this ceiling is also very beautiful. There is a lot of fascinating building culture, but at the same time, throughout the years, I have seen a lot of development, and development is good in a way that the city is modernizing and people have more access to good roads and infrastructure, so that I think development is good, but on the other hand, it is also destroying a lot of heritage building, which is a bit sad when you are you have a lot of passion towards these buildings. For example, this is in Ain Alem, in a small town next to Mekele. These buildings, a lot of buildings have been demolished due to road construction and new building construction. In Mekele city, there has been a lot of new modern buildings built, which is, I mean, there wasn't so many big hotels in the city. So now that they have built new buildings, they can receive more tourists, and there will be a lot more economic development coming. So in a way, it's very good. But when people are looking so much to the modern construction, sometimes these beautiful traditional buildings get ignored or forgotten. So I saw a lot of heritage buildings being abandoned, which is very often happening in other parts of the world. But the most shocking of all was these buildings that were being demolished around 2011, when I was just starting my research for my master's thesis. So when I was walking in town, I saw a lot of red marks, these crosses. And I asked people, what are these crosses? And they told me that the municipality has marked the buildings so that they would know which ones to demolish. And, you know, you cannot really romanticize these environment, but without any research and without so much knowledge about these buildings, we do not know whether if we are destroying the most valuable ones or not. So I thought, well, these buildings have already been decided to be demolished for new urban development. So we cannot rescue them, but at least I thought I could research about them. So that became the theme of my master's thesis. So what was happening then was, this is an aerial photo from Google Map of the center of Mekele. You can see Johannes Palace here. And this part in the white dot was being redeveloped by Mekele municipality. It is one of the oldest quarter in Mekele. And so there were old buildings which were deteriorating, and the roads, you can see that this part of the town is quite gritted, but this area the roads are shaped in organic way, so that the roads were very narrow. And so the city decided to widen the road so that more cars can go through and people would have better access in the inner part of the city. So this part, the red houses or buildings were being demolished and to be taken down to widen the road and to make a roundabout. So I decided to do a research, especially focusing on this historical area. But when I tried to make a research about this area, there was not so much information. There were written history about Mekele by local people, but there were not so much research about the spatial formation of the city. And so I decided to trace the history of the town by making interviews and collecting photos and old maps. This is one of the oldest photos that I was able to find in the Cultural Association of Tigray. It was hanging on the wall of the organization. And here you can see the Johannes Palace, and there is the river. It is still there, but it has gone underground, so you don't see it anymore. And then across the river, there were these. There was the town where many of the aristocrats lived, and the generals of Emperor Johannes. And so there were great mansions and big houses made around the palace, and also a market in the center. So the city gradually grew, centering the Johannes Palace. And now afterwards, the Italians came, they made the gridded town, and now it is growing and sprawling and so on. This is another view of the palace with the market and the historical quarter. The view of the palace. Actually, now I think this wall doesn't exist anymore, but the main entrance used to be on this side. Now people enter from this side, so small changes have been made. Recently, it has been renovated beautifully and has become a very important museum. And the circular wall going around the palace. And you can see how vacant the land used to be around the palace. Now, when you go to Mekele, you don't really feel this openness, but you can see people coming to make the market and to gather around. So the atmosphere of the town is really different. This is probably the oldest drawing that I found of the city, drawn by Henry Salt in 1809, so the British traveler. And so actually Mekele is not a very ancient town. Actually a rather new town. Before Emperor Johannes came at the end of 19th century, Mekele was only a small village. This is the INTBAU church, and there was the small village around the church and several villages on the base of the mountains. So I was able to trace the information about the village from the writing of the local historian. And on that book, it said that there used to be 9 villages in the city. So currently Mekele is a big town, but it used to be 9 villages, and some villages were on the side of the mountain and some were on the lower parts of the land. So that is the very beginning. And so some of these photos that I found, you can see that INTBAU, and then the village or the town kind of beginning to emerge. Already you can see these Hitmo buildings, the squared, beautiful stone houses. I am trying to trace the typology of these Hitmo buildings as well. And I think the earliest typology of these rectangular Hitmo houses started from a tripartite interior shape. So something like this would be like the most earliest shape of these Hitmo buildings, which would be divided into 3 parts inside. And then later on, when Emperor Johannes arrived and his generals and aristocrats started to build bigger buildings, the buildings grew a bit bigger and the typology transformed. And when the Italians came, they started building symmetrical shapes and and in a more European way, they also introduced new tools. So I think in the course of time, these Hitmo buildings have changed also gradually. Here are some of the maps that I've collected. It is actually not, there aren't so much maps, remaining maps. This is a plan made by the Italians in the 1930s. Actually, then it was not realized, but afterwards, after the Italians left, it was realized. So the Johannes Palace is somewhere around here, and you can see the river and the market and the indigenous settlement. So when you make a comparison with the aerial photo during the 1960s, you can see that this plan was realized, and the city is starting to expand in a gridded way. But still the old part of the settlement is there. And here is the rather, well, 2009 is a bit old, but the current situation of the town, where the grid has been extended, and it is ever extending now. And this area used to be the old villages, but the city is expanding in north, east, and southwest. You can see like these roads that have been planned, big roads. Compounds in Mekele, and for example, this area, you can still trace the old compounds of these houses. And so probably Mekele, the early settlements had like circular compounds, and then afterwards the compounds stuck together, and gradually it kind of made like this kind of block type settlements. And by making blocks and streets, the Hitmo houses also changed so that they would better be organized in a linear way. There was this beautiful book that I discovered made by the Swedish team in the 1970s. They made photographs in the 1960s. I found this book in the Architectural Institution of Japan, which was very strange because it's a very small library. And the only Ethiopian book that I found was this book. But I haven't been able to find this book anywhere else. So I think it's a very valuable book, which happened to arrive in this small library in Japan. But I was able to find some of the existing buildings that they found in the 1960s and compare them to the current situation. So some buildings like this one has been quite well preserved, and you can see that it almost hasn't changed. It is still there. Now it is like a tella bed. So before it used to be one of the mansions of the Dejasmach, which is the general. So a very prestigious house. But afterwards, when the land was nationalized and the houses were redistributed, these houses were inhabited by rather lower income people. So this is one aspect of the deterrorization process in Ethiopia, which is quite a threat to the historical heritage, because when these people move in, they come to live there, and sometimes they do not know about the history of the house or the value, and also it is often run by the Mekele, which has very it doesn't have so much funding for maintaining these houses. So little by little, the deterioration goes on. So there's a lot of example like this everywhere in Ethiopia. This is another house that I have found. Maybe this one is already gone by now. It was already in a very, very bad state in 2009. But you can see in this photo, for example, it looks quite big, in 2 stories. And this house was also one of a memorable house that because I was able to interview this lady, and the first time I visited, she was very angry because she didn't understand why I was doing this research. But I showed her this picture and she was very surprised because she said it is her grandfather and she didn't have a photo of him. So she was very happy, and she talked about many things about this house. And she told me that this house was built right after the Battle of Adwa. And so it is one of the earliest house that I was able to find. But sadly, due to the redevelopment plan, this house was also demolished. So after these demolition happened, the roundabout in the middle was realized and the roads were widened. And so I thought, well, evaluation of these buildings, especially these big mansions, are very important. But it is very often that only monumental buildings are evaluated and taken into concern. But I was very interested in what was really happening in this historical district, about what kind of people live there, why is it in a very deteriorating state, and so on. I also wanted to know the positive side of the place, because a lot of people thought that this inner city area was kind of like a red zone area, which often happens in historical area. The buildings deteriorate, people move away from the center, and rather low income people goes in to inhabit. So in Mekele, also that was happening, and a lot of prostitutes were living there and a lot of telebeds were open. So it was not an ideal environment, especially for the municipality. but when you walk around, you feel kind of peaceful, and there is rather a good community. So I was very curious why this peacefulness or the good community is created. So rather than interviewing the most prestigious houses, I decided to interview all the houses within this area. So I made simple measurements to make this plan, because the only map I had was the aerial photo from Google Map, and I could not really read the plan of each building. So I tried to do a simple measurement from the Google map. And so there were in total 175 households, which I was able to interview everybody. And I asked about the social information concerning number of inhabitants per household, gender, age, ethnic of the head of the household, their income, occupation, and ownership. Also, for the architectural information, I tried to collect the building typology, structure, water, and electricity information, building age, number of floors, and these kinds of information. So this is a lot of data, which constituted the main part of my thesis. I won't go into too much detail about this detailed information, but the most important outcome from this interview was that this area is extremely mixed, and it has a very nice diversity, meaning that sometimes you find people from the aristocratic family, which they were the previous owners of the big mansions. And sometimes, or about half of the people were newcomers who came from outside of Mekele to make a living. Many people were prostitutes or bar owners. Some were like simple food sellers, but this was working very peacefully because of this kind of people who lived here for a long time and making this network. And so when this peaceful community breaks down, or when like slum clearance happens, it is quite sad, because you are not just demolishing the buildings, but you are also demolishing the community itself. And it has happened in Mekele, but I think it is happening more in, for example, like Addis, where a big area of slum clearance is happening. So I think in a way, like widening the roads makes it easier for vehicles to pass through. And for example, in case of emergency, the cars can go through, or economically wise, it's better for the big trucks to go through. So in this aspect, it's good. But in regard to these communities or heritage, sometimes it can become a big demolition. And for example, this block has been entirely demolished to make the big roundabout, and most of the people were prostitutes and very young girls who are really depending on this work. And so we are not sure if this development or this new plan was good, until we see the outcome of it. But nowadays there are a lot of commercial activities going on. There are now like G+10 buildings, big hotels. Maybe in the future, a lot of tourists might come in to stay in these hotels. So this is the roundabout that was created in the middle by destroying the whole block of the area. Perhaps this plaza is a bit too big for this kind of human scale town. But the good thing is that they have made this beautifully paved road with local materials and stones, and so sometimes the outcome could be also have positive effects. Like, for example, these top two images are the roads that were not paved before. It's not exactly the same area, but when it's paved, it becomes much more pleasant to walk. And some parts of Mekele has become very active because of this kind of new development. And so there are definitely positive sides to this development. And I really look forward to the city's development. This is some photos from Addis. I'll just go through these very quickly. But as everybody knows, there are a lot of heritage in Addis and everywhere else in the historical cities of Ethiopia. But sadly, not enough research has been made, and sometimes it can be demolished before such research gets done. There are also like very peaceful communities living. Many houses that were big mansions before are inhabited by many families, which is also quite interesting. These kinds of state is a bit worrying when you are so attached to heritage, but sometimes it is not avoidable. But at least some buildings are being rescued or being preserved. Recently, I have been doing some research in Sekota during the COVID. I haven't been able to go to Ethiopia, but with the help of the local NGOs, the WAG Development Association, and the ambassador of Ethiopia to Japan, we have made a small team to do remote researches online, and have discovered at least 50 circular buildings. And I think now these houses, if people do not pay attention, they would be demolished quite easily. But if we start paying attention, it could be made of use, or at least before demolition, we could do some research. So this is my last slide, and I wanted to show you this population dynamic, and this is a population statistic comparing the state of Japan and Ethiopia from 1950 to 2050. So it is said that Japan used to be one of the fastest developing country after the Second World War. And many people moved to cities. You can see that red part is the urban population and the green is the rural population. So in 2018, we have 91.6% of the population living in city, which is quite a lot. And things have changed dramatically. But for Ethiopia, I've tried to make these numbers same so that you could compare. But the change is happening so much more faster, and it is going to, the population will grow a lot more in the future. So I think we will be seeing more changes, more development. And I think it is, I very much look forward to the development. But I think we should really be aware that the development and change is happening so rapidly in an unprecedented way, so that we really need to be careful about the heritage preservation as well. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rumi, for your presentation. I think it was very interesting, very enlightening. Before we head into our question and answer session, I'd like to remind everyone that you can type in your questions in the chat box, or for everyone who's watching us on Facebook, you can also type your questions there and Juliet will be forwarding it to me. So before I head on to questions from the audiences, I'd like to ask you, in your research, what was your conclusion to avoiding the demolition of these heritage sites or heritage buildings and residentials? What was your conclusion after having done your research?
Well, I think at the moment, there is not really an efficient one answer to this question. It's really difficult to, it's always the challenge of the balance between preservation and development. And I think development is pushing much more than preservation at the moment. But when I started this research, there wasn't so much research about Mekele, but afterwards, little by little, a lot of people have been doing research, and there is, I think, much more awareness now. So I think if we keep building this kind of thing, hopefully some buildings will be saved. I have seen that some buildings have been made of use to like art galleries, and some has been renovated. So I think we cannot absolutely, we cannot save all the buildings, or I don't think it is necessary to preserve everything, but at least I think we can preserve the very important ones if we keep on researching and trying to build awareness.
Okay, we have a question from Matabo from Lesotho. They ask how old are these buildings? Like I've seen some which were as old as the 1870s. So can you talk a little bit about the ages of the buildings you mentioned?
In Mekele.
Yes.
Yes. Well, the city itself is the growth of the building really started when Emperor Johannes came at the end of the 19th century. So probably the oldest one of these houses are around that period.
Okay. I hope that answered your questions. Another one from Rosa. She asks, as it is necessary that the local population is fully aware of the value of these beautiful heritage before even protecting it, how do you think the municipality should enhance these heritages?
I think it is important to the city could make use of this heritage if they do not demolish, or if they could preserve it. Actually, in Tokyo, we have demolished so much, and I think for example, after the World War, people really weren't aware of these buildings, so we just demolished them. But afterwards, some buildings have been demolished and then rebuilt again because people regret it so much. And so I don't think we need to, we don't necessarily have to repeat that. If we could raise awareness by giving education, or maybe just making like a small heritage map could help so that people would maybe appreciate a little bit more. Also, I think sometimes the regulation is not enough, or even if there are regulations, it is not followed. But so that in this term, the municipalities could play a role to really try to keep the regulation going.
Okay. Another question I have for you from the INTBAU team would be, in regards to the demolition or the destruction of these heritage buildings, is there any similarity among other cities here in Ethiopia?
I think it is similar. The same thing is happening due to the nationalization of land and redistribution of the houses, so that a lot of big mansions are occupied by low-income people. And so that has really accelerated the deterioration of these one of the most valuable heritage. So I think this could be the similarities between the cities.
Okay. Next question from Alamayo. He asks, does the land value have a direct effect for the demolition of these heritage buildings?
Definitely. I think the central part really gets affected first, because most of the inner areas, the old buildings are really old, and they could be targeted very easily when people sees the economic value of it. So in Mekele, I think that is happening very much. The municipality has also designated the area to become commercial so that people can build higher. And also in Addis, for example, you can obviously see that the land value is so precious that people, I think it's really difficult to keep the low-rise heritage when you can build much more higher and earn a lot more money.
Okay, next question from Johanna. She asks, does your study also include documenting the details in terms of construction technique, material detail, and layouts, and so on?
Actually, my colleague has done a lot of that, because when I have done my research in Mekele and interviewed a lot of houses, I noticed that even though there are very big mansions, I had never seen plans of these buildings, of the Hitmo houses. So I was very curious about why there weren't any drawings of these big mansions. And so my colleague researched about that. And he also researched about the stone techniques of these Hitmo houses, and it's very interesting. So maybe if he has a chance, he would also share his presentation.
That would be very appreciated, I would say. Okay, next question is from Tarn, who was our last speaker. He says, hello, Rumi, thanks for a wonderful presentation. With regards to local municipality carrying out slum clearance and demolition, with seemingly little consideration for residents and local buildings, do you think this is part due to land ownership policy in Ethiopia? As I understand, the state and church still own most of the land.
I think it is easier to do this for the country or the municipality because if they own the land, they could just say, please move out. And if they provide other housings for them elsewhere, it makes it easier. In the case of Japan, this is very difficult because there are private landowners. And so if you want to make a big development, the developers would have to ask each one of these landowners to move out. And it could take years and years. But as you can see, the examples in Addis, I think that one is the most extreme. I think it's definitely easier for the municipalities to carry out these kind of developments.
Okay, Tara, did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question from Kai, who asks, instead of preserving vernacular buildings, do you think constructing new buildings with local materials and traditional construction techniques be a better choice instead?
Well, I think if people could use as much as, if they could use the local materials as much as possible, I think that would be a more sustainable way. I think Ethiopia produce concrete, but I've heard that there is still not a steel factory, so everything is imported outside. And so the construction with steel is very expensive, and I think it is not very efficient. Well, but still you can build so much bigger and maybe higher. So I think the balance is still very important, but sometimes people just prefers new materials and they just ignore the local beautiful materials. So I think in this regard, maybe a little more focus could be put on to, for example, chica, which I think it is not very favored anymore, but I think if people use it in a very nice way, it could be a very sustainable and environmental material.
Okay. Next question is from Binyam, the chapter chair. He asks, is your research, at least in part, accessible to local municipalities and other relevant institutions?
I have printed out or handed out data of my research to the municipalities and local universities, but I think I still would like to publish something and try to really make a useful research output. So that would be something that I would have to work on in the future.
Okay, a follow-up question. He asks, have you witnessed a continuation of local building practices in current building practices of dwellings in Mekele or Sakota as well?
Well, recently I have heard the lecture by architect Rumi Okazaki, who has renovated the Emperor Johannes's palace. And he has told us that in Italy, it is very difficult to find, I mean, it is very expensive to expensive to cut stone. But in the case of the renovation project in Mekele, it was rather, the handwork was much cheaper and very beautiful. So I think this kind of local technique still is being used and could be used quite efficiently if we could plan things, I think.
Lastly, Abel asks, I was wondering if buildings that you have mentioned in your presentation as heritage were documented and designated as a city or urban heritage.
If
any of them have been documented
for World Heritage.
Yeah, within Ethiopia, or if they're protected.
Okay, so for my PhD dissertation, I have researched about Mekele, Gondar, and Harar. And so actually when I started my research, Gondar and Harar was also already inscribed in the World Heritage List. So my research was not an input to the for the documentation of the World Heritage, but more of what has occurred after the after it has been inscribed as a World Heritage.
So lastly, before we close out, the last question I have for you is, we have many young practitioners, young students about to start out their career. What would your advice to them be in incorporating these techniques in their day-to-day design life?
I think there are so much to be discovered, especially in Ethiopia. And I think sometimes, like when we hear about World Heritage, everybody wants to go there, they want to know about things. But as an architect or architectural historian, sometimes we need to focus on places that nobody pays attention. So I think anywhere in historical places, if we look very carefully, there are a lot of clues and a lot of like local knowledge and techniques hidden. So I think young people, I think, would be, they would be the future discoverers of these treasures in the country.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rumi, for your presentation and sharing with us your research. We really do appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending our last talk of our Learning from Ethiopia series. I hope you found it very educational. You can find the recordings to all the sessions on our YouTube channels. Be sure to check them out. I'd also like to thank Juliet for helping organizing this, and Binyam as well for this idea to introduce people to a side of Ethiopia they haven't seen before. So I think that's it for us. I hope you have a good night, everyone. Thank you. And also be sure to sign up to become a member to the INTBAU organization. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.